News coming out of Buffalo today, the Rasmus Ristolainen saga goes a little bit deeper. Turns out, according to this article here from BuffaloNews.com, Rasmus Ristolainen has implied a trade request from the Buffalo Sabres. Now it cites a Finnish MTV article here. It's actually called MTV Sports in Finland, and they did an interview with Ristolainen in Finnish, and the context and the substance from that interview is reported about in this Buffalo News article right here. Ristolainen does say in the interview that he wants to keep discussions with the Sabres management private, but he does have this one quote here towards the middle of the article. I cannot say anything other than the fact that on the 12th of September I will be at one of the NHL team's training camps. Then the headline of the MTV Sports article reads, Ristolainen dissatisfied with situation in Buffalo Sabres, wants to move elsewhere. Now this is a very, very interesting thing because he actually goes a little bit in depth even more. Says here that he hasn't been able to help the team win, recent seasons have been tough, and he hasn't been able to enjoy hockey. Now that's quite a big statement for a young guy in his mid-20s who's still got a lot of room to grow as a potential top-pairing right-handed defenseman. As a result, Ristolainen is the subject of trade rumors and people have mixed opinions on him. Ristolainen in general, to me, he's a good player. Now his stats won't tell you that he's a good player. He's 6'4", 218 pounds, right-handed defenseman, 24 years of age. He's got a $5.4 million salary, which is very, very good. He did get 43 points last year, but he was at a minus 41. And a lot of people looking on the outside would take a look at that and say, darn, he kind of sucks defensively. The thing with Ristolainen is, he's a pretty good player, but once you start playing him like a top 2 Drew Doughty, Duncan Keith-like playoffs defenseman, that's when he starts to show the cracks. Rasmus Ristolainen had 24 minutes of ice time on average per game last season. And playing for a Buffalo Sabres team that wasn't great, it makes sense why his statistical numbers weren't all that great either. He's playing half the game, he's playing on a bad team, and overall, despite getting 43 points, he's still in a position where he can sit there and say, yeah, the team hasn't been great and the situation hasn't been great. Ristolainen gets quite a bit of points. As I said, 43 points. He had 41 points last year, 45 the year before that. So he's a particularly well power play producer. And on top of that, he's got himself a pretty solid 3 minutes of power play time on ice per game, which is very, very nice to see for a guy who can put up the points that he does. However, on 5-on-5 play, he played most of his season with Jake McCabe and Marco Scandella. Yeah, he didn't necessarily have the best supporting cast around him on the defensive side of things. Sure, having guys like Eichel, Reinhart, Skinner, and all that up front is great, but if you're not winning games, and if you're playing with guys like Scandella and McCabe, it's not gonna be too well if this is your top pairing. Rasmus Dahlin was only paired with Ristolainen 15% of the time, and that was probably the best case scenario because Dahlin is Dahlin, but it didn't happen all too much. So it says to me here, looking at it, it really does make sense that Ristolainen would want out. He's been the subject of trade rumors for a while, and people have been looking at him like he sucks, but really, he's just a guy who's been overplayed. You can't take all defensemen in the league and say that they can play 30 minutes a night. 30 is exaggerating, but what I'm getting at here is the Duncan Keith, Drew Doughty in the playoffs kind of mentality here. You can't do that with a young guy like Ristolainen, who's in his mid-20s, who's still developing, and who still has room to grow, because it leads to a whole bunch of bad things in terms of the team being poor in general, which is reflected into his stats because he's playing all the time, and the young guy himself saying, yeah, I don't like it here. So, Ristolainen is in a position where he is the subject of trade rumors, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's moved. The question is now, what's the price? Because as I said, I think he's a very good top 4 defenseman, but he's been played top 2, like an elite level top 2, for far too long, and that's been a big detriment to his development thus far. Hope you enjoyed this quick little video, and bye.